Hello, so this video is going to cover Anji's unique mechanics, special attacks, overdrives, and some general gameplay goals. I have a part 1 video that covers his gameplay style and normal attacks. Check that out in the description if you haven't seen it yet. Also on one note, when I recorded some parts of this video initially, I referred to Anji's spin parry as a guard point, which it technically is not. I spliced in the correct audio, but it's going to sound pretty janky and cheap. But I'm not going to pretend I'm a video editing master to begin with, so let's just begin. Part 1. Anji's spin parry and specials. Before I cover his special attacks, I should cover the very core mechanic that many of his special attacks share, and that is his spin parry. Anji can spin around with either his actual spin move or by holding Ko or Fuujin. If Anji catches an attack with his spin parry, he'll glow and spin even more gracefully. And also a few things happen. Now if Anji catches a strike-based attack with a spin, the attack is treated as if it was whiffed. Also notice that the opponent is frozen in awe at Anji's beautiful dance. This allows Anji to potentially punish the opponent's attack on a successful parry. The more recovery that a move has, the better the punish generally. Also do note that Soul cannot cancel to any special attacks like you usually can because as I said earlier, success is treated as if it was whiffed if Anji parried it. Soul can still purple roam and cancel to save himself, but that's 50 meters spent just to make himself safe. Knowing what available punishes to go for depends case by case on which move you parried, but your typical punishes will be throw, close slash, 5k, 2k, and 2d. Throw is your fastest punish for people next to you, and close slash is your most rewarding punish. 2d is your best bang for the buck in terms of the reach and can set up butterfly. Now, as I said earlier, when you catch a move successfully, Anji will glow and spin around like a dork. He's invincible during this and cannot be punished. After the spin, he can block and tech throws. Anji can parry any strike or projectile. High, mid, low, and even a whale can all be parried. However, be careful about throws. Spin in front of Potemkin and you'll likely end up in his arms with your spine broken afterwards. There's also a few strike-based moves that you need to be wary about. If a move is naturally cancelable on whiff, the opponent can still cancel their normal and catch your punish attempt. A lot of 2Ps and 5Bs have this characteristic, so even if you parry those attacks, you're unlikely to get a punish afterwards because your opponent can just hit you immediately after you recover. Chip in particular has a special attack string where you could do a punch followed by a low kick. He can whiff cancel this, so even if you parry the first hit, he can still cancel to the second follow-up afterwards with little regard to what Anji is doing. A similar thought process should be applied to parrying jumping attacks. Anji can parry jump-ins, but the opponent may land as he recovers from his spin and you may not actually be able to punish the jump-in, leaving you next to your opponent in a fairly scrambly situation. Also be warned about multi-hitting attacks. If Anji parries something with multi-hits, he can still get hit if the move is active enough. You can just block afterwards, or if you're feeling real cheeky, you can counter super after you recover from the successful parry spin. Anji can also parry any projectiles, but projectiles will not cause the opponent to freeze in the same way that they freeze when their strike attacks are parried. As such, only parry projectiles when you feel the need to advance a bit while doing so. Your opponent can easily take advantage of your spinning animation and set you up for a mix-up as you recover. Parries are overall an important part of Anji's toolkit and grant him some versatility in making some good reads, but there are a lot of weaknesses to it that I'll go into when I cover his main parry special. Now with that finally out of the way, let's actually go through his special attacks. Do note I'm going to try to say their official name first and then refer to it as what people generally call them. And by people, I mean burger eating Americans. I don't speak Japanese, so expect me to royally butcher these names. Starting off with Shitsu, commonly referred to as Butterfly. Butterfly is a slow moving projectile with even slower startup. The startup of this attack is about as long as it takes for me to boot up the PC version of Strive. Now once Butterfly is out, it flies for a brief moment until eventually disappearing. If it makes contact with the opponent or another projectile, it turns into another projectile that arcs upwards and falls. It's a 2-hitting projectile at most and it doesn't combo. Butterfly is Anji's main Okizeme tool after a knockdown. Now if you don't know what Okizeme means, it's a term for post-knockdown setup where one can start a mix-up. The main way you're going to get Butterfly on the screen without your opponent trying to kill you for it is after you knock him down with 2D, throw, or Ko. You can try to set it up full screen, but this projectile almost has no presence. It's small, slow, and easily avoidable. As an actual projectile, Butterfly sucks, and it was never meant to really be a projectile to win a fireball war anyways. Get a hard knockdown and put the Butterfly on them. Butterfly allows for some pretty interesting setups because of the double hitting nature of the projectile. The first hit of the Butterfly keeps them locked down. Then you do an attack to keep them pinned down or mix them up. Butterfly falls and covers you, then you can follow up with more pressure. That's how the flow usually goes. But there's a lot of room for creativity. Now, where there's room for creativity however, there's good degrees of counterplay from your opponent. Your opponent can backdash because the Butterfly is so goddamn slow, which may require you to check the backdash with a Fuujin. Your opponent could wake up super as well, in which you just have to bait it out or have some kind of setup that can avoid it. Do note that the butterfly can naturally beat some invincible attacks on its own. Keep your matchups in mind. Butterfly is decent, but you have to be aware of your opponent's wake up options and get a read on their wake up behavior. Butterfly can also be used as a very greedy way to extend your pressure, but it's only best considered after you condition your opponent with a close slash pressure or if you anticipate that they're willing to block. You can cancel some of your strings to butterfly such as 2p to 6h or close slash to 5h, and unless they quickly react with a far reaching button, they may let it rock because they were anticipating Fuujin instead or something. If you get butterfly out, you can continue with your turn. However, do not abuse this, because if they begin looking for this, they could just stuff you out of the insanely long startup of butterfly. Suigetsu no Hakobi is Anji's spin parry. I talked a bit about spin parry earlier, and this is the first of the spin parry special moves. Anji will spin around and move forward. This move can be extended by holding the kick button, which will increase the guard point duration and the distance he moves. This is not an attack, it's a purely evasive move. This is primarily used as a read to catch the opponent's poke in a neutral game or go through projectiles. The reason why I say that this move is a read is because of the whopping 10 frames of startup before its spin parry is active, and not to mention that an unsuccessful spin that doesn't catch anything still has recovery. Anji is also in counter hit state during the startup and recovery of this move, so it kind of further cements the read based playstyle and the punishment if you're too careless with your predictions. Sometimes the spin is decent to be thrown in with some of your offensive pressure to mix things up. You can cancel some of your normals into the spin to set something up like a throw or more pressure, similar to how you may utilize close slash. Something to keep in mind if you ever need to change it up. Moving on to Ko, and probably one of the only two Anji specials where I can pronounce correctly. For that reason, Ko does not have a nickname. Ko is simply called Ko. Ko is an anti-air special with a huge hitbox. Anji starts rising up into the air and spins around with his fans. When I say that this thing has a huge hitbox, I'm not kidding. Ko just outright hits anything airborne within his vicinity. Ko will whiff on grounded opponents outside of very specific scenarios, so Ko should only be done if you anticipate a jump from the opponent or if they're already airborne and you can react to it. It's a great anti-air with huge potential and damage output since combos are possible after this move. Furthermore, by holding the slash button, Ko could be held where Anji will do his spin parry before taking to disguise. If Anji successfully guard points an attack, Ko will not come out. Ko is very useful against very jumpy opponents. Even Mei and random players have to respect this move due to his crazy hitbox. Even trades are favorable because Ko causes a hard knockdown. In the case that Ko whiffs, you can still save yourself as you have your air options after the move finishes. If the opponent blocks Ko, you can fall down with JK or JS and keep them in block stun. If it whiffs and it'll punish you as you rise, you can block and tech throws. If you need to reposition yourselves, you can air dash or double jump. Ko is still easily punishable if you get the wrong read and the opponent does not jump. The most basic but guaranteed punish is an air throw. Even with that in mind, Ko is a pretty powerful toolkit for Anji, as his risk reward is pretty nice in his favor. It's also one of his most powerful and damaging specials and is integral in many of his combos. Last but not least, we have Fuujin. Fuujin is a defining part of Anji's moveset and kind of works as a mini game in itself. Fuujin by itself is not the most interesting special. It's a forward moving attack. Holding the H button causes Fuujin to move further, and there are generally three versions of Fuujin: the unheld one, a partially held one, and a fully held one. They all do the same damage, but the distance and startup is different, and the fully held Fuujin launches opponents upwards. The fully held Fuujin also has been parried on its startup and behaves like his other guard points. If Anji catches an attack with his guard point, Fuujin will not come out. Now, as I said earlier, Fuujin by itself is not terribly interesting, but it has 4 different follow-ups. The first follow-up is Shin Ichishiki, which is done by pressing punch after Fuujin. Anji flies up and throws his fans down at an angle. This move is actually plus if the opponent blocks it, which allows Anji to resume pressure since he has the advantage after he lands. However, due to the startup of this move, the opponent can maneuver out of the fan's trajectory and even punish Anji in some situations if their jump movement is precise enough. Some characters can also anti-air or DP. This follow-up is generally considered to be fairly safe. The opponent has to be ready to jump in a very risky way or have their button ready to actually punish it. Given that this is Fuujin's only plus on block attack, or rather it is Anji's only plus on block attack in general outside of jumping in with air normals, this move is a good option if Fuujin is blocked. Because of its safe nature, the reward for this move is very weak. If the fans hit, you get some compensation damage, but the real purpose of this move is just to reset the situation rather than to get any kind of meaningful reward. The next follow-up is Issokutobi, which is done by pressing kick after Fuujin. Often it's called the hop. This allows Anji to close the distance and puts him right next to the opponent, putting you in a perfect range for a throw. This option can be done when your opponent is expecting the other follow-ups and is ready to block, but the hop is pretty slow and is interruptible by mashing. You can also be thrown out of it yourself. The hop can go over lows, but most of the time the opponent should not be mashing lows after blocking or being hit by Fuujin, and if they are, there are better options to blow up the low attack. Hop is a good thing to throw in every now and then to keep your opponents on your toes, but if they show that they can react to it, you want to limit its use. It does have some pretty good potential with RC to continue your pressure however. Nagiha is done by pressing slash after Fuujin and is Anji's low follow-up. This low is the fastest attack that can come out of Fuujin, to the point where it can be a true block string after it. It can also be delayed to catch the opponent's jump or mash. Nagiha is negative on block, but you're not often close enough to be heavily punished by it. The low follow-up is generally done as a combo ender. If this is used in block strings, you want to mix this up between his overhead follow-up. You also want to try to occasionally delay the low just to vary the timing, so you can catch your opponent doing things like backdash, jump, or mashing. On counter hit, you can pick up with 5k if you're close enough to the opponent. On regular hit, it scores a soft knockdown. If you have your opponent cornered, you can start another sequence of offense, but mid-screen hits often reset the neutral game. Rin is Anji's overhead follow-up and is done by pressing heavy slash after Fuujin. This is a fairly slow and telegraphed overhead, but that doesn't stop people from not blocking it at times. The overhead is punishable on block, and your opponent can get a close slash punish even, so this move naturally has some pretty big risk. The reward of this move is often arbitrary to the position of yourself on the screen. Mid-screen rewards are not too great with this, as the combos that come after are just mediocre. Near the corner however, you can get some pretty decent damage and even a wall break. While the overhead can be delayed like all of Anji's follow-ups after Fuujin, it's already slow as it is, and the fastest version can even still be mashed out of. If you do score a counter hit however due to your opponent's mistimed attack, the reward is very nice. If you do go for the overhead, be prepared to RC it if it's blocked so you can stay safe and continue more pressure afterwards. Now, before I go into his overdrives, let me talk about Fuujin and some of his flaws. Fuujin and his 4 follow-ups seem pretty complete, and perhaps it is, but the main reason why I said earlier that Fuujin is a knowledge check for your opponents is because if your opponents know a specific answer, they can eliminate a huge portion of the guessing game. It's kind of like a clickbait article, you won't believe this one simple solution to beat Fuujin, except I'm not bullshitting. Some characters have a meterless option that can cover nearly all of Fuujin's follow-ups, while some gain access to that once they have 50 meters for their super. Let's show Leo for an example. Leo has a flash kick style attack that comes out relatively quickly and is invincible on startup. If I do raw Fuujin and it's blocked with no follow-ups, Leo can punish it with that move. If I do the P follow-up, the angle sets me up to where I still get hit. The K and H follow-up have too large of a gap, so the flash kick can still hit. The S follow-up could be a true block strain, but if I'm too close, that also gets punished. The situation gets worse when supers are considered, because many supers in this game are generally faster. Ramlethal's online super also can cover the same situations. If your opponent shows that they can answer this properly, you need to be able to adapt and stop relying on Fuujin. There are a few answers to this, the first being somewhat more matchup specific, but properly spaced Fuujin can avoid a lot of the situations. Heck, if your opponent reacts incorrectly at the distance, their knowledge could be their downfall as they whiff their invincible attack and you get a punish. The safest answer though is to really limit your use of Fuujin in block strings and in neutral. It sucks I know, but Anji does have other tools at his disposal to play a reasonable neutral game, and his close slash pressure is still where the true strength of his offense comes from. Part 2. Anji's Overdrives. Anji's first overdrive is Issokutobi Sai. I will just call it fan super. It's a multi-hitting projectile super that spins in front of him. This move is not a reversal, so don't use it like a wake up DP. The super is mostly a combo ender. It tacks on good damage to any combo and is very useful for closing a round or to wall break the opponent and put him in a hard knockdown state after the screen transition, where you can run up and start your offense. Because it's a projectile super, you can RC it and it will still be out, but this often does not have much use other than to further add more damage to a combo where you need that few more pixels of damage to kill. Otherwise, this is kind of a while to use for 100 meter, but if you're that rich, don't let me tell you how to spend it. Anji's second overdrive is Kacho Fugetsu Kai. This is an important super to keep in mind. I'm just going to call this Anji's counter super. So this super is pretty strong and is another contributing factor to why making good reads with Anji is overall pretty, rewarding. The counter super is active at frame 0, so it's a true reversal. If your opponent attempts to meaty you, you can catch the meaty with your counter super. Basically, at any time if you think your opponent is going to throw an attack at you, you can counter it with a super. It catches any strike or projectile attack, but it will not catch throws. This counter super has 2 variations. If the counter catches an opponent's attack and they are close to you, you will get the full animation sequence where he does a series of attacks. If the counter is triggered but the opponent is not that close to you, he only does 2 of the attacks and does not have invincibility ability since he's not in a cinematic state. This variation mostly occurs if the opponent activates the counter with a far-reaching attack or is approaching you at a strange angle. This also occurs a lot if you opt to counter projectiles. If you intend to use the counter super for far-reaching attacks, it's best to know the situation as you want to make sure your opponent is committing to the attack, because the second animation is actually very punishable. The counter super also wall breaks if the opponent is somewhat close to the corner. Getting the full animation can carry them quite far, and getting a wall break is a huge benefit not only for damage, but for the hard knockdown afterwards. A non-wall break counter super knocks them full screen, where it's difficult to follow up for more pressure. The general use of the super varies a lot depending on the matchup and the player that you're against. Throwing out the super as a Hail Mary may have some mixed results, so it's better to understand the specific scenarios and the risk reward involved and know when the opponent is likely to throw out a move. The super is perhaps strongest when used as a true counter super in the sense that if you realize your opponent has done a super attack, you can buffer your counter super input near the end of their super flash and get a guaranteed counter. This varies super to super, but it should catch most things in the game. A failed counter super that does not catch anything won't cause the super flash to happen, but you still lose 50 meter. You are also punishable for a brief moment in the state as well. Part 3. Anji's general goals in neutral. When playing Anji, you want to get a feel for how your opponent behaves and understand what range their character intends to play at and ultimately how aggressive they wish to be. In this initial phase, gathering data is very important. Don't overcommit or assume. Watch them and try to understand. Do they jump a lot? Do they randomly swing? You have to play very patient. Your goal initially is to try to poke with your far slash, 5k, jump slash, and maybe throw out a few spin guard points to gauge what happens. If you can get your opponent in a state where they're blocking, see how they handle Fuujin. You can start with the safer options first like the fans, or go for more aggressive ones like the overhead or hop, but always switch it up. Once you score a hard knockdown, your close slash pressure minigame starts and you can go for an offense. If you score a knockdown with 2D, you can set a butterfly instead. Another thing to understand is how to keep your opponent in the corner. If your opponent is very eager to just air dash out, this is where air throwing is solid. If they just keep jumping, Ko is really good for keeping them pinned down. If your opponent shows that they're capable of dealing with Fuujin quite well, don't rely on it as a mix-up, only do spaced Fuujins or as a hit confirm. Nearly every single one of Anji's buttons has a purpose in the neutral game, so utilizing all of your normals is pretty essential. Don't ever be afraid to play slow, but once it's your turn to go on the offense, then you can really let yourself loose sometimes. Anyways, that concludes this video on Anji. I hope this was helpful and feel free to comment with a question if you have one, and I can answer it. I'll start up a part 3 that covers some important combos to help you get started. Once that's released, well, I guess it's just released then. I recommend subscribing. Do note that my channel has a bunch of non-Guilty Gear shit since I have an unhealthy addiction to gacha games. Now if that bugs you, just don't subscribe. Anyways, be good, get better, have fun, and take care.